Hello. This is a debrief of the September-December 2022 SBR exam. You can find the exam on the ACCA practice platform. You will need to work through each question before you watch and listen to the debrief. We're going to be looking at Jassy, which is a December year end. It's the ethics question, and in two parts. First part, looking at the requirement, is a question, isn't it, about revenue. So we've not read the scenario yet, but we understand it's going to be about revenue. So initially, about whether things are separate performance obligations. Well, that's really all about stage 2 of the revenue recognition model. And then whether you recognise at a point in time as opposed to over time, that's about stage 5 of the revenue recognition model. You don't have to identify the stages by number, but you do need to say, I will only discuss those particular parts of the model. So, are they separate performance obligations? And is it a point in time or over time? And it's an unusual scenario. You might want to pause the recording for a minute just to refresh your knowledge of the scenario. So I am Jassy. The customer gives me some money. In return, it's like a 3-stage process, isn't it? Number 1, I go out and collect some site data. Number 2, I then analyse the site data, which seems to take another 6 months. And finally, number 3, I now think about the license. So the last stage of the process, again, is the giving of the license. There it is. The license will be granted. So we need to demonstrate knowledge of what performance obligations are and then apply it to the scenario. Again, you notice when you read it through that everything is bundled together. You can't really have a license without the earlier part, and apparently everyone takes the license at the end, so it would seem a bit impractical and pointless to unbundle the contract. It sounds like a single performance obligation. So the points that I made is that, like the company, I think there is only one performance obligation. But remember, the key thing is, are you showing the knowledge? Are you using the scenario? If you get to the different conclusion, it doesn't particularly matter. But are you respecting the scenario and showing the knowledge? So from the scenario, I've identified the 3 separate services: data analysis and license. I've demonstrated my knowledge of IFRS 15, that a performance obligation is doing something which is distinct from other performance obligations, and then I've reached a conclusion. My conclusion today is I can't see how you can unbundle it, so the customer would get no benefit unless they took the license, so they'll take the license. So therefore, it's a single obligation. The key thing is, have you explained the scenario? Have you demonstrated knowledge? If your conclusion is different, it's not the end of the world. Secondly, is this about an obligation at a point in time or over time? Well, over time, remember, it's a bit like a training course, isn't it? When the students get benefits every day when they are trained by their teachers. So I understand over time. Is that the case here? Is the customer able to consume the benefits as the contract progresses? No. They do get reports, which are very interesting, but it doesn't mean you can go and start digging for oil. It just means, here's a report. Very nice, but there's no benefit at all, is there, until the license is granted. That's when control is transferred. So I think arguably this is about transfer of benefits at a single point in time, the granting of the license, and that's the point when the revenue should be recognised. Now let's move down and have a look at the other requirement. Well, it's ethical issues for Mr. Betzo, and again, resolution hopefully. Poor Mr. Betzo. Professional marks, remember, are linking your knowledge of principles and threats to the scenario. Very easy to get those professional marks as long as you make sure you understand the scenario properly. If you need to, pause the recording for a few minutes while you read the scenario again. So as you look through, you should be saying, okay, well, what do we need to, what might we need to talk about? For example, let's have a look at some of the things in here. Mr. Betzo has little knowledge of the technology involved. There's no need for him to understand any of it. Now, clearly, Mr. Betzo needs a detailed knowledge of of accounting regulation, accounting rules, but he certainly needs an understanding of the business, doesn't he? He can't just walk away from it. So in my mind, if he doesn't have the basic product knowledge, that's really a lack of professional competence. Not in adding things up, but double entry, but just in terms of approach to business. We then find out that he's been manipulating the data, which again you could link if you want to professional behaviour or integrity. You might have wondered about this suggestion that the license should be a lease, and you might be saying, well, I don't know what the rule is. Look, I think it's the ethics question, so you should be saying, well, I'll gamble, I expect it's wrong. So even if you're not sure, it is wrong, but if you're not sure, I'd gamble there and say professional competence. Finally, of course, when Mr. Betzo tells Ms. Stylos, again, about the prospective share price fall, as a minimum, that's a breach of confidentiality. When you look at your answer, it's good that you've mentioned integrity, but sometimes when I'm marking, people mention integrity 20 times. It's good the first time, but you need other things. You need the other principles. You need other threats where appropriate to make sure you can fill out your answer a bit. So, here we are. Remember, you can always play your joker. Because Mr. Betzo is ACCA qualified, he must comply with the ACCA Code of Ethics. Lack of product knowledge, professional competence and due care. Accounting treatment of license, again, competence and due care. Again, rerunning the data, integrity. Remember, what does integrity mean? It means that you have to be what? It means you have to be straightforward in business. It's not enough to name the principle. You need to explain it. He's not being straightforward. Confidentiality, again, well, he's using, isn't he, his knowledge for an improper purpose. He's using his knowledge for an improper purpose. It may well be it's a criminal offence, like insider trading. I don't know. But again, I would probably just stick to the threats, stick to the principles, because you know you can talk about those from a position of authority. Mr. Betso, I guess, should fall on his sword. But as always, discuss with those charged with governance. Perhaps get guidance from the ACCA. And generally, again, if he doesn't really know what's going on, then he ought to think seriously about resigning. Best I can do. That's my debrief then of the question on ethics.